Tough matchups, tough draw in the first round for Kansas, but maybe overall, is it enough to make a run for the Jayhawks with a healthy team coming back? We break down the bracket for KU on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can give me a follow on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, what do you think we're talking about? It is the bracket coming out. It's always so beautiful to look at, to fill out, and then you'll be scratching here and there because your bracket will inevitably be no longer perfect within just a few games of the bracket, or for some of the luckier ones of you, maybe later in the day on Thursday or Friday. Anyway, so Kansas's bracket is out. Their path is set. We're going to be breaking it down, why it could be a tough draw for Kansas. Doesn't mean they're going to lose, but matchup-wise, stylistically, could be a little bit tough for KU, so they're going to have to be on their A game. Thoughts on the pod and the region as a whole, and what would constitute a good tournament and expectations for KU heading into this one. First, we are brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Let's start right there. Kansas was awarded the 4 seed in the Midwest region. And as part of the pods, they will not be playing in the Midwest. Now, if they make it through the first weekend and make it through to the second round or the Sweet 16, then at that point, they'd be playing in the Midwest, which still is not like overly close for Kansas this year. But the pod, the first 2 rounds they're going to be playing in would be Salt Lake City, Utah, which last time they were there, the comparisons of the 2018-2019 team to this team continue on. They got a 4 seed in Salt Lake City, and they did win that first game there against a team who I remember coming in Northeastern was a very hot 3-point shooting team, but they just dominated them. They blew them out. They were way more athletic than them. Now, Samford, I think, is a lot more athletic than that Northeastern team was, but then things did not go well in the second round against Auburn. And Samford is the 13 seed. I said on the show recently, thank you to the everydayers tuning into that one, kind of what to look out for, who are teams you didn't want to play as part of it for KU. The 2 teams that I really hampered on were McNeese State and Samford. Sure enough, McNeese State is the 12 seed in this region. So, I mean, if you win your first game, there's a chance you can play them in the second round. Though, when I said that more so, like if you're playing McNeese State in the second round, might be a tough matchup, but it's like if you're playing a 12 in the second round, can you really complain? That said, you did get Samford as the 13. 29-5 on the season are the Samford Bulldogs. And, you immediately look at the schedule, and they lost 98-45 to Purdue in their first game of the season. And immediately you go, okay, well, then this is going to be a cakewalk. Well, that was the first game of the season. Also, Purdue is better than Kansas is. And it's just different. It's styles make fights, right? And with Kansas, the style for them of what Kansas we know has kind of struggled in is teams who can shoot threes, teams who can space the floor and shoot a high volume of 3. And for what it's worth, Samford, their head coach is Bucky McMillan. They call it Bucky ball, which is basically we're going to run transition really fast and we're going to launch a bunch of threes. So when you look at that from a stylistic standpoint, like that's not great for Kansas. Then on top of it, what are some other things that maybe Kansas has struggled with so far this season? Well, you could say, okay, when you have to guard like a athletic 5 or like a stretch 5 man, that's been a problem for Hunter Dickinson, who's a bit slower. Their main center, I don't know if this is the proper pronunciation, Achor. He's a 6'9", 227-pound big man, plays about 60% of their center minutes. He's shooting 45% from 3 this season at the center position. Bit of lower volume, but he's still getting up like 2 a game. So that is not great as part of that. And then the other thing with matchups is how athletic are they? Now, this isn't a power 6 team necessarily athletic. They play a lot of smaller guards in the backcourt, but they're quick. And so like this is an athletic team. I wouldn't say it's like the most athletic team Kansas is going to play this year, but it's an athletic team. They play fast. They play to the athleticism. So that's not great. And then the last thing here is Kansas this season is 2-4 against teams who are top 25 turnover rate defenses. Samford ranks 16th in the country in turnover rate defense. So the biggest things to me were you playing a team who stretches it, shoots it well from three, and shoots a lot of them, and were you playing a team who forces a lot of turnovers? They actually run kind of a press defense. Those are both things that hit for Kansas. Now, the good news for Kansas here is that some of those stats can be inflated a bit when you're not playing at a Power 6 level. So, like, realistically, what if instead of them being the 8th best three-point shooting team in the country, what if they were playing a Power 6 schedule? You know, the numbers would drop down or something like that to where they're like the 40th, or I don't know. Like, for instance, in the Purdue game, which again, a bit different, they have Zach Edey down low, so you almost expect 3-point shots, but they went 5 of 31 against VCU, who just missed out on the tournament, but that's a good team. They were 8 of 26, 31%. So there's no guarantee it translates over, but certainly on paper, it does become a little bit scary. And it's not a guarantee. You know, Kansas could have the worst matchup in the world in the first round, but they could still just be better than them because you have the better players and, you know, the better this and that. It's just that when you have a bad stylistic matchup, it increases the chance that the upset could possibly happen. Now, I do remember the story back to Samford being kind of a pressing team, one that forces, you know, turnovers. I think it's helpful for Kansas that they have the long week in between. I remember a story back to Bill Self's first year at Kansas. They were 4 seed that year, actually, too. They made it to the Sweet 16, and they played UAB in the Sweet 16. That UAB team upset their way through. I think they were 9 seed and, like, upset the 1 seed in the second round to get through. And UAB that year was a pressing defense. And I believe the story goes Kansas in practice the week leading up, because you had the week in between for the Sweet 16, basically like would practice playing offense against like 7 or 8 defenders at a time. And by the time they got to the game, they were ready to go, and they beat UAB by 20 points, and they scored over 90 points in the game. So maybe playing a team like Samford in their style is actually helpful to play them the first game of the week. Now, it's not ideal that you got a Thursday tip. I thought that I saw that Spokane was supposed to be Friday, but I don't know. Maybe I was wrong with that. Or Salt Lake City. So I don't know. I guess that's not totally ideal, but you have the time off to prepare for it. So that is a positive. Obviously, the biggest effect on everything is probably just going to be Kevin McCullar and Hunter Dickinson's health. But, you know, we go into the idea we've talked about so often that, okay, but Kansas is going to be better set up for the NCAA tournament because longer TV timeouts, longer breaks between the action, so that a team who doesn't have as deep of a bench, a thinner team, is going to be able to weather that a little bit better in the NCAA tournament. If you're playing a team who's pressing you for 30, 40 minutes of the game, that's going to wear you down a lot more. So there's just another thing that you would chalk up to being like, yeah, that might not be great for this matchup. All that being said, though, you know, Samford is still, they've lost 5 games. They're still a team that's ranked 81st on KenPom. Like, this isn't, it's not like a guarantee Kansas is going to lose this game. Kansas is going to be favored in this game, right? Kansas is going to be favored by a handful plus of points. But again, you go back to the idea that it makes the upset a little bit more possible when you have a good matchup here for Samford, and we see that all the time across the NCAA tournament. But yeah, I mean, the health of Kevin McCullar, the health of Hunter Dickinson, like, those are going to be vital. Those are going to be huge for Kansas. We heard from Bill Self last week. The plan or the hope was that both those guys are going to be back and ready to go this week for the NCAA tournament. How much of that was jockeying for better positioning in the NCAA tournament seeding? You know, could you have argued Kansas should have got a 3 seed? I mean, you probably could have resume-wise, but I understand it based on them fading at the end of the season, based on the injuries, why they did get a 4 seed. Like, I don't think you're going to get that many big complaints from KU fans this year, because they saw what the team looked like at the end of the year, to where you can honestly make the case, if it was just based on, like, how good are you, forget the resume. I don't know, 4 seed maybe is even too high in that standpoint. Like on KenPom, for instance, they're ranked 22nd, which would be more of a 6 seed. That said, the resume does matter, and it absolutely should, and so that's why you do end up a 4 seed. But I guess my point being was, I don't think you're going to see a ton of arguments. Maybe some people thought they should have been a 3 or could have been a 3, but you're kind of splitting hairs there. I think it's a little less I don't know, of anger, maybe, I guess you would say, from KU fans than last year when the region of death was given to them, right? And that was pretty brutal in how it was given. This year, even though there are some tough matchups, it's not to that level, I guess, of what you would say. But yeah, I mean, it kind of all depends to me. Like, if you don't have Kevin McCullar and Hunter Dickinson, not just back, but playing at a healthy or near healthy level, I think it's going to be tough. But I think what becomes interesting is playing teams that can stretch you in the case of this game, and possibly in a second round game if you play McNeese State. I think Gonzaga, I don't know that they have as much of stretch 5s necessarily. Gonzaga has played like Graham Ike a ton, who he's more of like a post-up big, and they play another big with Ben Gregg. That might actually be a more favorable matchup there that you're talking. That'll be interesting with how Hunter Dickinson deals with that, especially if he isn't 100%. But if Kansas is 100%, I definitely think there is going to be something to the idea. Every year, there's that 4 or 5 seed that everybody picks against. And usually there's upsets by the 12 or 13 seeds. Usually it's not that one. Usually it's the one you low key aren't picking. Like, remember a couple years ago, Kansas wins the title. I forget if it was their 4 or their 5 seed. I guess it was the 5 seed, was Iowa that year. And they just won the Big Ten championship. A bunch of people were picking Iowa to make it to the Final Four. Nobody was picking them to lose in the first round. They're the one that lost in the first round. And then some of the 5s that were everybody's picks ended up getting through. So Kansas is going to be a popular pick to get upset here. That actually might be a good thing. Play with a little chip on your shoulder coming through for KU, but certainly it is a tough matchup for the Jayhawks. All right, let's continue on thoughts on not just the first round matchup, the pod, and the rest of the region for KU in the Midwest on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. First, this episode is brought to you by Nissan. This week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by your friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. The Tennessee Volunteers can best be described as a Pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves after claiming the top spot in the SEC regular season. Player of the Year candidate Dalton Knecht has carried the Vols all season, made them a team to watch in March, and he's going to be one of the players to watch. Such a fun player to watch. Really takes a Tennessee team that usually they're stuck in the mud. Dalton Knecht takes them to that next level. He provides that horsepower of offense that you're not used to seeing with the Tennessee team. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop at nissanusa.com. We're also brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports. From live games to highlights to in-depth analysis, Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball, the college basketball tournament, you can get it with the Fire TV. They've also recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sporting brands, all for free. That includes us right here with the Locked On Network and all the big pro leagues and conferences or college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up on the latest in the world of sports. March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more. Plus, they have cooking videos, travel, everything you can need. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Thoughts on the full bracket in the Midwest and the rest of KU's pod on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for joining us here on the show. We'll have plenty of tournament coverage coming at you this week here. So make sure you're subscribed to the show anywhere you get your podcast, and think of it every day or two. Tuning into each and every one of those. So let's start with that second round real quick. Like I said with Gonzaga, Gonzaga is a really good offense. They're one of the best offenses in the country. Defense has been okay. They are really hot right now. From February 7th till now, they've only lost one game, but also playing in the West Coast Conference, like a little bit easier to do that than playing in the Big Ten. One thing, though, that's interesting about them, good 2-point defense, which may be a bit of a struggle for KU there, though. But weirdly enough, like Gonzaga is a better team than McNeese State, but I actually like the matchup stylistically better if you're playing Gonzaga in the second round than McNeese State. And again, styles aren't everything. You could win or lose a game if you have a good or bad style, but I do think that is kind of interesting because when you look at Gonzaga, like, they don't shoot a ton of threes. They rank in the 300s in terms of their three-point volume. They play kind of too big basketball. With McNeese State, Will Wade, the former LSU coach who got in trouble for the NCAA stuff, he has a bunch of like D1 transferred out, like Shahada Wells from TCU. Remember him? They've got some dudes on that team. They're a very athletic team. They're 7th in the country in three-point percentage. They are 6th in the country in turnover rate on defense. So that would be a bad matchup in the same way that Samford would be. Then when you scoot out to the rest of the bracket in the Midwest, I think when you were looking at, okay, what one seed is Kansas going to be paired with? I think everybody wanted to avoid UConn the way they're playing right now. Like, they look like, to me, the best team, or I don't know, the best opportunity we've seen of a team to go back-to-back. I guess Villanova, that in-between year, they won the title 16, 17, they got the one overall, and then they won it again in 18. I don't know. Even with that team, though, is like, I don't know. This UConn team I'm buying into more having the opportunity to win back-to-back than maybe I have since that Florida team. But so you wanted to avoid them. You knew you were going to avoid Houston just because with the Big 12, and also that would be great. I don't think you mind Purdue that much because it's almost like this idea. Purdue's a great team, but it's almost this idea of like, oh, they could lose before you get there. Like, honestly, But beyond that, it's like, okay, their big thing is having a big center in Zach Edey, right? Well, Hunter Dickinson's not Zach Edey size. He's not, 7'4", 7'5", 300 pounds. He's like 7'2". So like it more than when you see Zach Edey go against a 6'9" guy where it's like a 7-inch advantage. That's only 2 inches. That's 6'11" to 6'9". That's 7'1" to 6'11", right? Like at that point, you can maybe match up with it a little bit better. Now, Purdue does shoot threes, second best percentage in the country, but a lot of it is centered on Zach Edey drawing doubles, which you might not have to do with Hunter Dickinson. So again, Purdue, better team than you've been this season. And if you do end up making the Sweet 16, and so do they, like they're going to be favored. But it's not like a horrible matchup, I guess I would say, for KU. And then when you look at kind of the bottom half of the bracket here, I do think there are some teams that stand out. Like I've been kind of a believer in Creighton this year, so we'll see what they do. I do think this Tennessee team is better set up for a deep run in March than a lot of other Rick Barnes teams have been recently, because they do have the scorer in Dalton Connect that like usually they have great defense, but the offense isn't good enough. This year, Connect can kind of carry the offense. Still, though, you do feel like, okay, are they going to Rick Barnes their way through this thing and get upset, in the first or second round or something like that? But I'm honestly not even going to worry about the bottom half of the bracket. And it's not even that I don't think like there's good teams. There are good teams. Like I said, I think Tennessee's a really good team. I think Creighton's a good team this year and stuff. But it's just that if you make it to the Elite Eight, which is the only way you can play any of those teams from the bottom half of the bracket, number one, if you're in the Elite Eight, you can expect to play a good team. It is far and few between that you play like a St. Peter's in the Elite Eight when that happened. And even then, if you do play a team who's like a 10 seed or an 11 seed or whatever in the Elite Eight, you start to get a point where it's like, oh, they're hot. They're playing like a much better seed right now. You know what I mean? And then on top of that, it's like if you make it to the Elite Eight, that would be the cherry on top of this point. Because if this team makes the Elite Eight, it's going to feel like you're playing with house money. And it probably means you got a couple big wins along the way to get to that point. So I guess what I'm saying here is this. Don't really focus on, oh, I'm worried about playing this team if we make the Elite Eight, because a lot of that stuff sorts itself out anyway. And if you get to that point, you're probably going to play a good team anyway. So more so thinking about the top half of the bracket where that first pod, a couple tough matchups for KU. Everything's winnable though. And then possibly Purdue is a 1 seed, which again, Purdue's a really good team. They'd be favored over you, but I would like that matchup better than, even though they beat UConn, better than playing UConn again or playing Houston again, which we knew that wasn't going to happen. Or honestly, maybe even playing over North Carolina, who's a team who has a couple good guards and 3-point shooters on the outside. All right, let's continue on here. What would be a good tournament? What should be the proper expectations for Kansas in this NCAA tournament on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks? First, this episode of the show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to be finding all the quality professionals that you can right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. They have the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals with a B, which makes it the best place to hire, gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So by the way, as I'm recording this, we're going to know about the KU women's basketball team in about half an hour, which that's coming at 7 Central Time. I don't know when you'll be listening to this. So we'll have some news and we'll talk about that on another episode coming up with Locked On Jayhawks, whether they make it or not, and what their draw is and all that good jazz. Obviously, hoping that they can get in as well. So we'll be keeping an eye on that for the KU women's basketball team. The big question here to finish things off on this episode of the show, what would be a good tournament? What would constitute a good NCAA tournament for KU? What should be the proper expectations? Because I think this is a very interesting debate whenever you're a school like Kansas is, whenever you're a blue blood, because the expectation is always win a national title, make a Final Four. You know what I mean? Like, have a banner year. Getting a Final Four is at least putting up a banner, right? So from that standpoint, that is always the expectation at Kansas, and that's always the underlying expectation. But for what this team has been this year, do we adjust that expectation? Do we start to go, you know what, if they can make it to the second weekend, at this point, I would be happy with it. But then again, if you would have said that before the season started, which should the expectations be set when the season started, when you were preseason number one, again, it would have been Final Four or national championship. I'm going to kind of split the difference, and I'm going to view it this way. If you can make it to the second weekend with a team that we have wondered if it's the worst team in the Bill Self era, I think that's a success. And then at that point, you're playing with house money. And that's kind of how I view it. If you get to a certain round where you feel like you are playing with house money, where you're like, anything from here is the cherry on top, that constitutes hitting the expectations to me. And so from that standpoint, I would view it as, if you can make the Sweet 16 after all the tribes and tribulations, after all the ups and downs, I'm not saying it would be a resounding success because, again, it is Kansas basketball. I'm not saying throw a party or anything, but I think going where we are now to where we are expectations in the tournament, it's totally fair to expect them to get there. They're the highest seed of their pod, as much as I do have questions about some of the matchups, or the best seed of their pod, I guess, if you want to put it that way. And then at that point, you could be playing a 1 seed or something like that. So that would be what I would say about that. But I wouldn't fault someone for saying, no, this is Kansas basketball. I don't care if they, didn't have a great regular season. They won a title as a 6 seed in 1988. They, went to an Elite 8 as a 4 seed in Bill Self's first year, right? I wouldn't fault someone for being like, we should always shoot for the expectations being the Final Four of the national title because this is Kansas basketball. But I think basically what I'm saying is there can be small wins along the way, and that if you do at least make a Sweet 16, I don't think you can come away from it being like that was an abject disaster, would maybe be the way of saying it. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast. Plenty more NCAA tournament coverage coming the rest of the week, including on our YouTube page. See you next time with LOJ.